in today's Summer Blitz with a focus on multilingual learners. And the focus of today is creating a climate for equity and success. So,
I guess my picture's first. I'm sorry. I'm Kalyn Wulatin. I am an English learner consultant here at Wayne Risa.
And I am Zeinab Haidous. I am also an English learner consultant at Wayne Risa. And our colleague, Khalil, is unable to be with us today, but we would like to also recognize his name. So we are going to begin today's session with a quick Pear Deck activity to test your knowledge about multilingual learners. We are going to navigate to the Pear Deck slide deck where you will engage in answering about 5 true or false questions. You may use another device or open a new tab on the current device that you're using. So if you would go to joinpd.com and then enter the code that you see on the screen. And then I see that we have 2 students that have been connected. So we'll wait a couple more minutes for more of you to connect. So either on your phone or if you want to open a new tab, just go to joinpd.com and the code is UXAGNN. Underwhelmed X-rays always give new ninjas. Yes, and your answers will be anonymous. All right, we have 6. Let's go. As soon as I said the word anonymous, the number jumped up. Okay, so let's get started. The very first question, so you will see a dot on your screen. You can drag that dot if you think it's true to the thumbs up, or if you think it's false to the thumbs down. So first statement, close teacher-child relationships are a significant predictor of the language competence of multilingual children in all of their languages. Do you think that is true or false? Usually I see on the bottom how many people have answered, but I'm not able to see that today. Oh, there, 8 out of 9 responses. Here we go. All right, let's show the responses. Okay, so it looks like the majority said true. A couple people said false, or maybe they haven't moved their dots, but the correct answer is true. Absolutely, having that teacher-student relationship is very important to help the students build on their languages. Awesome. Next question or statement. All right, next statement. Children learning or acquiring more than one language simultaneously may experience linguistic confusion in different social contexts. So if they are learning more than one language, you think they're going to have some linguistic confusion? All right, 8 out of 9 responses. Okay, almost everybody put true. However, the correct answer for this statement is actually false because a lot of times our students use what they have learned in one language and transfer those assets to the new language. So where we might think that it does cause a confusion, it's actually an asset for them to have another language because they can transfer those strengths onto the new language. All right. Next one, multilingual children benefit from continuous home language development at all levels of English language development. So if they have a home language and they are still practicing it at home, will that benefit their English language development? All right, so we have mostly true. That is correct. Like we said, it's very important for students to develop their home language in order for the English language to be strengthened. So a lot of us used to think that, oh no, you can't speak your home language anymore. You have to speak English. That is not true. It is okay, because research shows that if they are fluent in one language and their vocabulary is strong in one language, those will help develop the English language or the whatever new language they are trying to acquire as well. All right, we're getting better at this. Next one, social English proficiency equates with academic English proficiency. So social language versus academic language. Do we think they are the same? Or do we think one is harder to acquire than the other? I think we all agree on that one. Yes, it is false. And as we all remember, I remember when I was going to school to get my EL endorsement, I always learned the BICS and CALP, and that, CALP, takes about a lot, different amount of years to acquire than the BICS. So conversational skills take about 1 to 3 years, while academic skills take about 5 to 7 years to master. Using native language in school interferes with English language acquisition. All right, see, we're getting the hint. We're getting the hang of it. It is false, yes. It is absolutely okay for our students to use their native language to help clarify concepts in their native language to be able to understand the new concept in English. So yes, that is false. All right, next one. Or is that it? That's it. That's it. All right, that's it. All right, that was fun. See, you got better at it. All right. So let's move on. So as you can see, here is our agenda for today. It is based on the 4 literacy pursuits from the Equity Framework in Cultivating Genius by Dr. Gholdy Muhammad. And we will be speaking to how they connect to multilingual learners and their families. We will be focusing today's session on criticality, identity, skills, and intellect. So in her book of Cultivating Genius, Dr. Gholdy Muhammad speaks to the pursuit of criticality, in which it helps us have a critical lens on systems. It also critically humanizes instruction and makes it more compassionate. It helps us develop empathy for our students and helps us actively disrupt oppression, because good intentions are really not just enough. So what does this mean for our students? Our students will be able to gain critical understanding of power, entitlement, oppression, and equity. They will begin to assume responsibility for ways in which they process information. And finally, it really helps us as educators create a community of teachers and learners and not just a hierarchy. So when it comes to multilingual learners, we like to call them multilingual learners, whereas you might see different terms used by MDE, which refers to them as English learners or ELs. It's important for us to really create a climate for instruction that is based on the success of these students by recognizing their assets and what they really bring to the table. All languages and language varieties that students and families use are valuable. So as educators, we need to ensure that we enrich their language development and learning and affirm their identities as well. So as we saw in the earlier activity today, that languages that our students bring are actually assets, and all languages and language varieties that students and families use are valuable. So translanguaging is when a multilingual person's full linguistic repertoire is used and being honored, instead of just trying to keep narrowly focusing on a single language, really use that other language and have it as an asset. Language practices are much more fluid than that of the strict separation of languages that is often demanded in schools. Translanguaging is also a way for a teacher that they can teach. It could be an interactive read aloud where the teacher can read one paragraph in one language, while the conversation or prompt or notes or even responses are in more than one language, so that students can use their languages and the full linguistic repertoire that they have in their own language. So when translanguaging is embedded throughout schooling, it is a means for social justice. It validates and humanizes bilingual students' learning processes as well. So making sure that texts are available in multiple languages for our students, or maybe creating spaces during writing workshops or for students to really show their bilingualism and have multilingual texts available. So when we do that, like, what message does this send to our students? It really allows them to realize that they are allowed to read in other languages, but at the same time, do they have to produce the text in English? We like to think of it of a gradual scaffold type. So they begin by using the translanguaging, and then slowly they start incorporating more English within their learning process. So and it really focuses on the people who are enacting their various language practices in the classroom. So building relationships with multilingual families is also very critical and needs to be asset-based and language-focused. But how? We have to be aware of the family funds of knowledge, and by that, we mean taking a look at the essential cultural practices and bodies of knowledge that different households use to survive and to thrive. And we also need to establish language goals with the families. So learn, what are your goals? What are the parents or the family's goals for their children? Think about the strength of the families and use those strengths to help the students understand their culture. And really try to connect with them on a deeper level. Encourage the use of home language. Like we mentioned earlier, they can use it at home for educational purposes, or maybe families can use it as a resource to connect home language with the new language for education process. And then provide activities that support different languages and cultures of the family, and really connecting with different community resources, such as having different EL services for the families, maybe educational opportunities for the families as well. And we need to also be aware of the WIDA can-do philosophy, because we know that the cultural and linguistic practices that the families have may differ, and to be able to really ensure that we have meaningful two-way communications with the families as well. So when we talk about meaningful two-way communication, what do we really mean by that? That means engaging in family engagement practices that attend to the family's experiences, their strengths, and their needs, to really ensure that families understand the message or the content that is being communicated, meaning that the communication is going out to these families in a language that they understand. Having translation and interpretation resources on hand is also very helpful for having that two-way communication. So think about, what systems do we have in place, each of you in your schools, in your districts, to really provide those translation and interpretation resources. Think about what, the time commitment, the resources that are available in your school to provide frequent and comprehensible information when it comes to curriculum, student progress, maybe instructional strategies, student assessment data, the students' actual language development, and the content learning as well. So that's something to keep in mind as we, begin a new school year as well. So how do we as educators encourage families to support their children at home? We can acknowledge and encourage the use of home language for educational purposes. We may also extend a naturally occurring language and literacy activity that may take place at home. For example, writing letters to family members abroad. We can also encourage families to come read books in their native language at school. And you might think, well, how are they going to do that when only, one person or two people speak that language? Trust me, students will start to pick up, and they will start learning different words and understanding the story from the pictures, from the body language, from the gestures. So it's a great opportunity for the students as well. So as we may all agree, identity building and support needs to come before any skills development. And identity is the cornerstone of all learning and all relationship building. And without human relationships with teachers and peers, or relationships to contextualize content, no real learning and change of behavior can really happen. So our children need to have really agency on the development of not only their own individual identities, but also the collective identities of the social environment in which they live, or they grow, or learn, or play. They need to speak for themselves. It is, identity is dynamic and it is changing. So they must be able to be aware of the, different, the differences, the different identities, racial, gender, cultural identities in the classroom as well. So when it comes to your individual identity, your name is at the core of your individual identity, or maybe the key to it. So how do we treat the names of our multilingual students? We're going to watch a quick clip of a TED Talk by Haidous, who is a Michigan educator, about name and identity in the classroom. And then we're probably going to have a short activity to go along with it. So Kalyn, would you please play the video?
On the first day of school, rather than just calling off names while I took attendance, I resolved to ask my students to teach me their names. Now, granted, this came with a little bit of resistance, with some students saying, "Oh no, Miss Issa, you just say it the way you want to." But I insisted that they teach me to say their names the way their parents say their names. This minimally altered beginning led to children having an increased confidence. On the first day of school, rather than just calling off names while I took attendance, I resolved to ask my students to teach me their names. Now, granted, this came with a little bit of resistance, with some students saying, "Oh no, Miss Issa, you just say it the way you want to." But I insisted that they teach me to say their names the way their parents say their names. This minimally altered beginning led to children having an increased confidence in their names and also having a more genuine interest in learning about the identities of others. Among many other remarkable side effects of this practice, one took me by surprise when one of my then third graders, who only spoke English, approached me and said, "Miss Issa, Khalud, Arturo, Hamza, and Ala are going to be in my group." And he said it just like that. He said ha, cha, a, ra. And these are all sounds that are not in the English language. As adults, we know trying to pronounce sounds that are not in our native language isn't usually the easiest feat. But for children, it absolutely can be. Now, if this child ever decides to take on the wonderful endeavor of learning other languages, and those languages might use some similar sounds, he will now be better able to communicate fluently in that language, and therefore be better understood.
All right. So speaking of names, now we're going to take a moment to reflect on Huda's TED Talk by doing a quick activity in breakout sessions where you will tell your name story. So each person in your group will have about a minute to tell their story. Tell about why your parents chose your name. Maybe if you were named after somebody, who was it? Do you like your name? Why or why not? And if you could choose another name, what would it be and why? And then decide amongst your group, which story would you like to share with the whole group when we reconvene? All right. Any questions before we go? Back, everyone. I would love to hear from a couple of you. So who would like to share their name story, or maybe their colleague or somebody in their group? Just go ahead and unmute. Anybody?
I'll go.
All right, go ahead.
I got my name based on family tradition, Katie, but we spell it differently because there's 2 E's at the end of it, and every female in my family has 2 E's at the end of their name. So like Randy, Audrey, Katie, Freddie. And then we put that tradition with our dogs too. So
I was just gonna ask you, what about the dog?
yeah, no, she's a certified therapy dog, and her name's Sadie. So she gets to go to my classroom.
Nice, very nice. Thank you for sharing, Katie. Anybody else?
I'll share. My name is Samantha, and my birth father actually named all of his children Sam. So I'm one of many Sams in a group, and it's his stage name. So there's that crazy story. And I do like my name. I actually looked it up not too long ago, and it means a good listener, which I definitely feel like I'm a really good listener. But if I could choose another name, I would choose the name Tiffany. I don't know why, but Tiffany is just like my going out name already. And I just like the name Tiffany. So if I could, I would be Tiffany. But I do love the name Samantha.
Awesome. Love it. Thank you so much, Sam. All right. Well, thank you all for sharing your name story. And just a quick quote on here. Knowing each other's names is the fastest way to build rapport with our students, especially when it comes to newcomers who may feel alienated or excluded or not really fitting in our classroom. So when they hear their names pronounced correctly by their teacher, it may really be the key to their learning. So take a moment at the beginning of the school year and have the students really teach you their name, how to say it, how to pronounce it. And, because it really might help break that barrier between you and the students. So on her website, Huda Isa, the author of the book that you see on the screen, and the person we watched in the TED Talk, provides this scaffolded activity on storytelling, which is called Teach Us Your Name activity from the Esther Park website. We will be sharing that link in the chat box with all of you if you would like to use it as an icebreaker activity at the beginning of the school year. Thank you, Kalyn, for dropping that. I was just copying it. So yeah, feel free to use it. And if you don't have that book, grab a copy. It's a good book to have as a beginning of the school year activity as well.
Okay, thank you so much, Zeinab. So now we're going to take a look at skills, and we're going to really focus on the purposeful use of language at different English language proficiency levels for this. So first, this may be a review for some of you, but regardless, whether this is new or a review, it's good information. Again, here we're using the word English learner because that's what the feds use and MDE uses, and that's how people are going to be classified on, students will be classified on MyStar, for instance. But in our own talking, we prefer WIDA and multilingual learners. But what happens when a student comes into your district, and this is true of all students, no matter which language or languages they speak, is there's a home language survey on your enrollment form. And the way the two questions are worded are exactly as you see on the slide. And that is because of the state of Michigan and guidelines. They must be worded exactly that way. Is your child's native tongue a language other than English? And is the primary language used in your child's home or environment a language other than English? If the answer to either of those questions is yes, that triggers the WIDA screener, which determines the English language proficiency level of the student. So if they qualify based on their screener score, then they will have EL status. And if not, they will not receive any services. But regardless, of course, parents and guardians are notified and services begin if they are needed. Here is a brief overview of the levels of WIDA on the English language proficiency levels here. Michigan is a WIDA state. So level 1, as you can see, is entering. Once you hit level 5 and 6, we are getting into native-like fluency in English, and that those levels are determined proficient. There is an annual exam, which is the WIDA Access Assessment. If a student scores a 4.8 composite on the WIDA Access, which takes into consideration the domains of listening, speaking, reading, and writing, then that student will exit. The screener is a little more complicated. We can talk to you about that if you're interested another time, but this will give you an idea of these levels. Now, I want to give you a better idea of these same levels using a children's book, If You Give a Mouse a Cookie. Okay, so students at levels 1 and 2 at the entering and emerging stages, they can point to an illustration, right? Or make gestures. So if you say something like, show me the mouse, or where is the cookie, they can show you where those are in the book. Then as they progress, they'll be able to answer yes or no questions with 1 or 2 word answers as well for other types of questions. So if you say, did the mouse want a straw? They can say yes. Or who gave the mouse a cookie? Boy, right? And your job right here isn't to make them speak more or speak in complete sentences yet. Right here, the good job here would be to model and expand on whatever the student says. So if the student says boy, when you ask who gave the mouse a cookie, you could say something like, yes, you're right. The boy did give the mouse a cookie, and so forth. At this level 2, students can sequence pictures or illustrations to summarize a story. And this would also go for expository text, like maybe do a cause and effect or a timeline sequence or something like that as well. At the developing stage, now students can answer why or how questions in phrases or short sentences. They can begin to explain their answers more fully. Again, at levels 4 and 5, now we're nearing native fluency and getting to native fluency, so they can do what you would expect everyone to do, like retelling a story with the main plot elements, asking what would happen questions, or why do you think, or what might be questions, right? Like, why do you think the boy kept giving the mouse what he asked for? And for here, the job is to kind of make children sound like a book, right? Or to sound, to make sure that they're including full sentences and other things in their speaking and writing, depending on, of course, the circumstances and objective of the lesson. So here we have academic language versus conversational language. Both really help thinking and communication, but we privilege academic language more in academic settings. And even though today we're here talking about creating a climate for equity and success for multilingual learners, we can think of all of our learners as academic language learners, because we don't talk at the dinner table typically like that, right? We speak more like you see on the right. Or when my daughter was young and came home, I wouldn't ask her to describe the water cycle to me, right? It would be more, what did you do with your friends today? In language like that. So a lot of these things that we do with multilingual learners actually benefit all of our students, because all of our students have different levels of proficiency, for lack of a better word, in academic English. I'm not going to get deep into this, but know that there are the WIDA English language development standards, and we would be happy to talk to you more about this at another time. But a lot of it focuses on key language uses and can-do descriptors of what students can do at each level, and that's what we're going to look at right now. So here are the key language uses as defined by WIDA. If you saw earlier WIDA standards, they're very similar, but they did change the names a little bit here. So the idea is we have narrate, inform, explain, and argue. In certain subject areas, more of a key language use might be used, like narrate, of course, is found in ELA, but it also might be found, in science, if people were talking about their anecdotal observations about a phenomena, right? So all of these can be found in all areas. With an emphasis, of course, in certain areas more than others. These were the can-do descriptors that I mentioned, and the can-do descriptors by WIDA, and they have not quite caught up with their new key language uses, because you can see here that this actually says that it's for recount, but you have all 6 levels of English language proficiency in a particular grade level cluster. So this happens to be the grade level cluster of grades 2 and 3, and this happens to be reading and writing. So there's another page with speaking and listening as well. And the link I just gave you takes you to the page. You can find your grade level cluster and kind of go from there. The nice thing about this is talking about how students process something and how they express something. So we always have, the interpretive domains of listening and reading and the expressive domains of speaking and writing. And then it shows you not only what they can do at each level, but what they have coming up, right? So the next one or the next one or the next one, you can do a bit of Vygotsky +1, the zone of proximal development, and see where they're going and organize your scaffolding based on those. For our final category, we're going to just take a brief look at intellect. And the way we're interpreting intellect for multilingual learners is providing our multilingual learners with meaningful access to curriculum. So if a lot of the skills piece was promoting their English language development, here we want to make sure that they have access to the full content, grade level content that they are learning. So one of the biggest ways to do this, and best ways, and the only research proven way, is SIOP, which is the Sheltered Instruction Observation Protocol. I'm going to put a little plug in here. We have many different SIOP opportunities for professional learning, both working directly with districts and countywide offerings that I would encourage you to attend. The three areas of SIOP that I'm just going to look at very briefly this afternoon are the ones that are shaded there in that blue-green color: comprehensible input, strategies, and interaction. But when you see this, you can see that SIOP has 8 components, and in other professional learning opportunities, we like to delve deeper in there. So comprehensible input, and we have a lot of resources that we will be sharing off of Padlets today. And if you go to the comprehensible input column, there's a lot of places there to help students actually access the curriculum in English, especially if you have secondary students. Initially, some translation can be used, and there's ways to do that there when you look. There are other things too, though, like adapting text to meet the level of a student, also having things like immersive reader that can read things aloud, and other things that you may be used to. There are other things students can collaborate with, like a collaborative vocabulary notebook that you can find on there that you use with Google Sheets, which you can use with a lot of images and visuals, as well as a translation component, and other ways to even translate captions for YouTube and things like that. Looking here at interaction, I'm going to give you one example of a way to have interaction in the classroom with students of different levels, and that is through different kinds of structured conversations. One type of structured conversation is a strategy we call QSSA. Oops, I only said 2. QSSA or QSSA. That's why I prefer the second version. And for this, we have a lot of different scaffolds and supports. We also, of course, have students talking to each other, and that's very important because the person who's talking is learning. When you look at research, the amount of times that children in general, and that means all your students, end up being able to speak in the classroom is a very, very low percentage indeed. But the more they talk, the more they learn. Also, when you get kids later writing things down, usually that old, I know this is an early L statement, but I really think it works K-12. If you can say it, you can write it. If you can write it, you can read it, right? So we want all these things connected. And if we get them talking more, if we make that directly and explicitly connected to their writing, often their writing improves as well. So for this particular strategy, the teacher would ask an open-ended question to everybody. And a big piece of this is peer rehearsal. So students are going to be able to rehearse their answers, either in partners or in groups. And they're going to be able to use this with this linguistic scaffold of a sentence stem. So a couple of examples on this slide is, this reminds me of, I experienced this when, or I can relate to this, because all those are ways to talk about making connections. Okay, now if I had a level 1 student, I might just say, this is like blank. Maybe this is like blank because, right? But as you get students up to other levels or other, English language proficiency levels, then you can add more language and more difficult syntax. There is a signal, because when everyone is ready to respond, whether it's a thumbs up, whether there's a card on the table that you're flipping over, whether it's putting something in a chat or in a Google slide deck or whatever, that's what they'll do, whatever you've decided, when they're ready to respond. Okay. Students, again, as we said, are going to share their thoughts using the sentence stem or the paragraph frame or other supports with a peer. And then you're going to randomly assess the students and call on them individually, but they know this because you've taught them how to do this, so they're ready for it. And they've had time to practice, and they've given the signal that they're ready. So all of that can help when you are whether you're using a spinner or a digital spinner like on Flippity, or you've got your popsicle sticks or whatever, you randomly call on a student to respond. Okay. In the interest of time, I'm going to skip to literacy after having just said how important speaking is, but let's take a look here for a moment. Because we have some different scaffolding for reading, going from least to most effective. So if you take a moment to compare the continuum for effective reading of these passages from left to right, you can see that in the highly effective column, students are building background through interaction with vocabulary that is in the text that they will read. They discuss their prior knowledge after interacting with that vocabulary to help their focus, and perhaps also help them decrease any misconceptions they might have. During reading, students and the teacher are monitoring their comprehension through the use of a response signal, as we mentioned before, and then they get to summarize orally with a partner to cement their learning. In elementary and secondary, citing evidence from the text is paramount, and referring to the passage after reading is wonderful for content literacy and language learning. Let's take a moment to look at some of the scaffolds for writing. Again, due to time, let's just jump and focus on that highly effective column for today. So for writing, the highly effective column includes a model paragraph for students to see what they're aiming for. Students prepare a list of the important, meaningful, and powerful vocabulary that will elevate their work, and they do this before they write, and that will help them as they write their paragraph summary. While the teacher providing a sentence stem in the somewhat effective column is okay, that support converts itself or becomes highly effective if the stems are differentiated according to the student's English language proficiency level. For instance, imagine a paragraph that's going to be about a compare and contrast situation. One student might have the frame, both blank and blank, blah, 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 right? But another student might use similarly or likewise to join their sentences. I want to show you this because, sorry, again, time. I'm going to show you this one. So I want to talk a little bit about low language and high cognition. This is a topical net, or some might call it a semantic web. And I just want you to hear the student who is just pretty much getting into level 2 and what she has to say about what she's done.
The topics is people, and the main idea is forms, size, action.
Okay, and after that, she went on and talked about supporting details. So you see, even though this is tier 1 or common language in English, things like home, size, actions, color, people, this whole thing is high cognition because she could be using the semantic web later, to do something with a science text or social studies or something else. She uses language, academic language already, like this is my topic, these are my main ideas, right? And later she actually did talk about supporting details. She could tell you how she's connected play to actions and why she connected dance and slide to play. Right? She can describe that. And so she's able to expound upon how details connect to other details that connect to main ideas, and things like that. So once again, all of these things are on our English Learner page, and I'm going to show you that here. When you come down, a lot of these resources we've talked about, including more explanation on these scaffolds and other things. This is, links to our professional learning, which is very good as well. This is a lovely webinar that Zeinab and I did with a consultant in special education on English learners with suspected disabilities, called The Bridge Between Language Acquisition and Disability. Another shameless plug there. But here are our Padlets. So when you come into them, like this is as you could tell, there's several. But you can find different areas here. We always link, this is our main palette. We always link to all the other ones here, different ways to communicate with multilingual families, right? And there's all sorts of things, all sorts of resources across. The first one that we showed you in the other picture, since I mentioned PSYOP and we were talking today a little tiny bit about comprehensible input and interaction and strategies, you can also go in these and find more resources like that. And all of that is off our webpage now that we have newly developed, and we'll be trying to keep up to date. And I'll drop that in the chat one more time. And I'm sorry about it being a little bit rushed at the end. That's me trying to make us fit. We said 60 minutes, Zeinab, and I think we're always pushing our luck a little bit. But we'd like to thank you all for being here and taking some time on an August afternoon to think about how you're going to be working with your multilingual learners this year.